I think people are still joining. Why don't we wait for a few minutes?
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah. Streaming in.
Okay. So I think we should. Good evening and welcome to today's Asset Colloquium. Asset Colloquium is a forum that organizes colloquia at the TIFR on all Fridays at 4 p.m. and it mainly deals with matters related to instrumentation, electronics, detectors, software, medical technologies, and also many popular level science talks, sometimes of science and so on. And I guess today's talk will be that last theme of things that Asset organizes, and but very interesting as you would see. Um, Firstly, on behalf of the Asset Forum, I want to thank Professor G. Ravindra Kumar for making this colloquium possible in terms of contacting Hari Pulakkat and also making all the arrangements in the process. So without taking more of your time, I think it is, I would like to now invite GRK to formally introduce today's speaker and also conduct the rest of the proceedings. But just before I hand over the podium to him, I would like to say if you have questions, you might want to either in Zoom or YouTube as the case may be, and the speaker can answer these questions at the end, unless you have some very pointed questions which you would like to ask, in which case the Zoom participants can unmute yourself and ask question, and please mute back your mics. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Satya. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to invite you all to this colloquium, and even a greater pleasure to invite the speaker, Hari Polakar. Formerly, he's a science journalist and writer based in Bangalore, with nearly 3 decades of experience in covering science and technology from an Indian point of view. He's worked primarily for 2 publications, Business World and the Economic Times. He writes about science and technology, how science and technology shape the Indian economy and society, and how major global trends in science affect India's future. He's now the editor of Shastra, a new science and technology magazine from IIT Madras, and he is the 2020 winner of the Indira Gandhi Prize for Science Popularization. The book that he's going to talk today about is his first book. Informally, I would like to say that it's been always a pleasure for me and other colleagues who have chatted with him to learn very interesting things about, he has wonderful insights about how Indian science has progressed. I think this is because of his deep interest or sustained interest over a long time on science in general and how science has progressed through the turbulent years after independent India's, when we emerged independent. So it's a great honor. It's also a privilege for me to welcome him and hand over the screen to him. Well, Hari, all yours.
Thank you, Ravi. It's a privilege and a pleasure to do this at TIFR. It's been a long journey. I had made multiple visits to TIFR, and those in TIFR had actually helped me write this book too. Their archives and questions and interviews. So I will start sometime in 2016. Is this visible?
Yeah, it
It
is.
is.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Okay, for me, it's cut a little bit on the side.
This is fine here. Yeah.
Okay. So a friend introduces me to an literary agent. Her name is Kanishka Gupta. And within half an hour, he calls me and asks me if I have a proposal. So then I write a proposal in an hour and sends it off. Then I call him after another hour if he has seen it. He said he has seen it and he has sent it off to several publishers. Now this was a little problematic because I didn't expect him to send it because it was not supposed to be a professional proposal. So just a few ideas jotted down that came to me at that particular time. Well, after a week, I heard from some publishers. Within a month, I got 4 offers. It was even more surprising and in some ways embarrassing because it was not an idea that I thought would work. It was just a history of Indian science over 100 years, but some random people selected. There was C.V. Raman, there was Saha, there was G.N. Ramachandran, and some other people who later, there were some private companies, there were some foundations, just an eclectic mixture with no connection between them. I didn't expect the publishers to accept the proposal, but now they've accepted it and I signed a contract, I got an advance. Now I have to do something. Before this happened, I had been thinking of writing a book for at least 10 years, and I could not get an idea. Probably around 2000 onwards, I've been thinking of writing a book, and twice I came very close. But in 2011, I sent a proposal to Hachette, which ultimately now published. I signed a contract with Hachette India, and they were happy with the proposal, but I did not write it because I thought I could not do it. There were constraints, severe constraints. So now, having signed a contract, I have to find a relevant idea that will hold the book together. And in my phone calls with Hachette, they were very flexible. So, which is why I chose Hachette finally. They let me write the way I thought it would, and I need not stick to the original proposal. So, I will take you through some of the thought processes that have been going through my mind for the previous 16 years when I thought of good ideas to write. So that was a time when Indian books had been published all over the world. Fiction novelists were doing very well. The 3 Indians who won the Booker Prize, non-fiction not so well. And there were only 2 shortlisted entries from India, summons for the Samuel Johnson Prize, which is the equivalent of the Booker Prize. This divided the island by Saman and Maximum City by Suketu Mehta. Now, I was always conscious that if I wrote a book, it had to sell worldwide. Science books do not sell well in India. India itself, anyway, is a small market, and science books form a smaller market. So, unless it sells across the world, it is hard to make a living by writing, which is what I wanted to do ultimately. So, I had been reading books on science. So, history books had done well in India, Indian histories. I have seen this book, India After Gandhi, in US bookstores. William Bradham's Anarchy is also selling well outside. And I don't know about Ivory Throne abroad, but it's certainly sold very well in India. So I knew that it's possible to write Indian history and sell very well. But I did not quite understand what constituted in science history, history of Indian science. If I looked at the books that I enjoyed, I picked randomly 3 books. The Second Creation, the history of particle physics. Chaos, which I still think is probably the best book I've read in science, was the story of how this branch developed, Chaos. And then The Man Who Knew Infinity, biography of Ramanujan by Robert Canigal. The last one is an Indian theme, but why did Robert Canigal write it? Why didn't anybody from India not write it? So it turns out that Canigal was in India only for 6 weeks. And all the research that he did from outside India. If we try to write the history of, the biography of Ramanujan from India, it is not that easy. We don't have the archival material about somebody who lived in India. So execution is a problem. And what sort of biographies do we write about Indian scientists? We don't have that scientists, except probably a few, GNR, C.V. Raman, and maybe before that, Bose, Saha, whose biography has all been written. It's not easy to pick a scientist whose biography would be interesting to a global audience. And writing biographies of Indians also brings with it problems. Indians are very sensitive. It's not possible to go beyond a point about their personal lives. In Europe and America, they speak very frankly about their personal lives. The relatives speak about them, friends speak about it. So it's possible to do good biographies. It's much harder here. So I had, when in 2011, I had sent the proposal for a book on Kerala mathematics, the Kerala School of Mathematics. This is what I got. Heard from a UK editor of a very, very large book publisher. So if these mathematicians can be said to have changed history or mathematics in any way, then it might be a runner. And what he said was, if it's an isolated story that influenced only Indian mathematics, then they were not interested. So it now seemed, and it was obvious rather, that I had to find a theme that influenced the world. And that was not easy from India. So these were the questions that I asked after signing the contract. So did Indian science influence global science? Probably not enough to write a book about. Are there captivating human stories in Indian science, among Indian scientists? Definitely yes. Did scientific research develop Indian economy? Yes. So can the last two be good stories? I started meeting people very randomly. I met whoever I knew, spent some time, but it was still very difficult to find resources. I had limited resources. The advance that you get from a publisher will run out in no time. If the archives, if I had to go abroad to spend time in an archive, I had to spend much more than what the publishers gave me. And I didn't have the time anyway, because I had a regular job. I could not take time off. Although most of the people were still alive, some people had died. So these were my options. First, start with the most accessible people who would meet me and spend time without asking questions about why I'm doing this. So I started with them. Then whatever I found interesting, I will pursue. And then at some point, I thought that some significance would develop about what I was doing. So I was sitting in ICTS talking to Bala Iyer, and then he told me, why don't you meet Govind Saru? So I had heard of Govind Saru. It was just a name. I knew vaguely that he had built a telescope, but nothing more than that. I didn't know much about radio astronomy in India, how big it was, whether it was an extensive field, what radio astronomers did. And I didn't know about radio astronomy at all. anywhere in the world at that time. So, but then um, I have a habit of meeting people without knowing anything. And I found this a good practice because if I prepared, I would start going in a specific direction before I met somebody. If I didn't know anything, I can probe and some interesting things would develop. And this is not an uncommon practice among journalists. You know, the most famous person who used this was Larry King, Larry King Live. And he would go to a meeting, he would go for an interview, television interview without knowing anything. Sometimes it backfired, which it did when he met Jerry Seinfeld, but most of the time it would work. So for me, I was not on live TV, so it almost always worked. Unless the person insisted that I send questions, which Govind Swarup did not. So I met him in Pune in an afternoon at about 2 o'clock. And we started talking. Within a few minutes of our meeting, somebody decided to mow the lawn just outside his window. And the noise was so much that I couldn't understand what he was saying. And I was recording the meeting, and it was clear that I wouldn't hear anything once if I played the recording. I spent about 50 minutes and I had another meeting. This was not supposed to be a very long meeting, but I was just testing the waters. And I got up and by the way, this was already 8 months into the project and I had no idea where the book was going. And then I got up, I said, okay, we'll see you later. And I came out. As I was going out, he said, you know, I was very frustrated. Even after 2 months, I didn't have any idea. So I sat in the library and then got this idea. I was almost out when I heard this and I came back. And the lawn mowing had stopped by then. And I spoke to him for about 5 minutes. And then I went for my next meeting. I stayed in Pune that night, and next morning I came back to Bangalore, and I kept thinking about what he said. The day after that, in the morning, I took my computer and then wrote this sentence. So, clouds had been gathering slowly since morning. Wind picked up through the day, signaling a turn in the weather. Govind Swarup sat in the library of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, watching the sea glittering in the intermittent sun, worrying about his future. Swarup had moved from Stanford University to TIFR 2 months ago, but he was yet to start work. He had no ideas. I didn't write it exactly this way, and some research had to be done. I had to find out what was the weather like on that day. Of course, I asked him how it was. He said it was sunny, but I had to still check. And my friends at IITM gave me the weather forecast for that day. And another friend in Times of India gave me the next day's weather report. And it was sunny, and it turned out that the monsoon came in the afternoon of that day. And when he started in the morning, it was sunny. So, and then it went on from there. And then I started doing more research on this, learned about the telescope, and I wrote the next paragraph and the next paragraph and the next paragraph. And it went on from there. In about 3 months, I had written a chapter about a Ooty telescope. So it was not in the form that it is now, but there was a structure there. And I knew at that time that this would work if I continued in this way. But I still had no idea what I would write after that. So since I wrote about Ooty, the next obvious choice would be GMRT, continue with Swarup. By then, I learned a lot about him. I took a course on radio astronomy to understand how it went, to understand how telescopes worked. And went to GMRT twice. I had not gone to Ooty at that time, but I went to GMRT Um, and then over the next 3-4 months, I wrote the GMRT chapter. So once again, it was not in the shape as it is now, but I wrote about 70% of the chapter as it exists now. Now I have two chapters. I didn't know what to do next, but then I thought, since I wrote about radio astronomy, let me figure out about other radio astronomers. So at that time, I had gone to RRI, met Ravi Subramaniam, who was RRI director and Govind Swarup student, and to primarily talk about his own work at Ooty. And then after the meeting, he took me upstairs, showed the work that he was doing at that time, and it looked interesting. And then I met more people in RRI, read a little bit about history of RRI, and I found that it had an interesting history. That was the first time I heard about Radhakrishnan, Siva Raman's son, who was the director of RRI. There was not much in the library, but there was one booklet, which was a collection of his writings, which the librarian gave me. I went through that. It was quite fascinating. So, and then I made that the third chapter. My reasoning was I had to look, I cannot, if a subject develops in India, if it's restricted to one institute, and at some point there can be a problem, it may die. So I was always interested in knowing in other institutions where radio astronomy was practiced. So, and then Radhakrishnan's chapter I wrote. In any case, it was because of his character. I thoroughly enjoyed writing the chapter, meeting the students, and it became a slight sort of an interlude before the next one. So I had 3 chapters now. During this period, in one of the meetings with Govind Swarup, he asked me, why don't you meet Srikantan? Because he was the director when GMRT was built. And he was in Bangalore, in fact, quite close to where I lived. So I wrote to him. He asked me to come. I talked to him. Then I understood about the work he had done before he became the director, about his early experiments in Kolar, just before independence, the formation of TIFR. Within about a month, I wrote down that, and that became the prologue. So now I had a prologue and 3 chapters. So the next question was to ask, okay, I have written about radio astronomy. What else happened in Indian astronomy? And the obvious answer was X-ray astronomy. And Srikantan, when I met him, did talk about what he did for X-ray astronomy, how he went to MIT, saw the experiments, the first X-ray astronomy experiments, and then he came back and started an X-ray astronomy program. And another meeting at RRI, one of their scientists earlier, who had retired, G. Srinivasan, told me about Srikantan and how his students built the astrosat. And this was interesting because when I looked at the history, I could trace this right from Srikantan when he began his KGF experiments till his students built the astrosat and launched it in 2014. It was an unbroken story. So, okay, so then it became the 4th chapter. As I was working on this 4th chapter, I realized that TIFR, none of these people could have built and launched astrosat without ISROSat. So then I investigated the satellite program in ISRO, and it became 5th chapter. After a while, I switched the chapters. So I had Ooty, GMRT, Radhakrishnan, then ISRO, and then astrosat. It came to about 120 pages. So then I realized, okay, this is enough. People won't read about astronomy anymore. So by that time, I had to find other things to write about. And I was very conscious from the beginning that the book has to have a unifying theme. Because in my proposal, there were 10 isolated chapters with no connection. So astronomy, throughout the astronomy section, the common theme was difficult working environments, no money, bureaucracy. It took long time to get foreign exchange, and there were many cultural issues as well. Now, can this go across the book, across other areas? The second section was chemistry and chemical engineering. This was sort of an automatic choice. So let me go through this. So for writing the astronomy section, sorry, already talked about this. Chemistry and chemical engineering was in the original proposal because I knew it had enormous economic impact. So my proposal initially was more about the connection between science and economy. And most of the people there sort of selected themselves. Once I decided to write about chemistry, I had to write about C.N.R. Rao. I had to write about M.M. Sharma, Mashilkar, and Rama Rao. And then I looked at the social impact of chemistry, and I knew about the leather mission. This was sort of an unusual chapter at the end, but I decided to add it because I wanted to show the social impact of science. Now, astronomy is a very interesting subject for the public, but chemistry not so much. I was quite confident that if I wrote well about astronomy, many people would read it. But chemistry, except for the chemists themselves, I was not sure that people would be interested. And many students have told me that chemistry is the most hated subject. So the challenge was to make chemistry interesting. The chemists themselves were interesting people. They had interesting lives. I could bring in the economic impact. Still, I didn't want the book to be a series of profiles. I had to discuss the science. I had to bring in the science, what they did. So this was a big challenge, but I knew I had to deal with it. The specific interviews presented their own challenges. So C.N.R. Rao obviously had enormous contributions to material science. He had made big contributions to Indian science as well, because he made science respectable. He raised the profile of science in India, got money to everybody, not just to himself, but for all scientists, as much as he could. All these are fine. And he struggled. So the struggle was a common theme through the book. And C.N.R. Rao struggled as much as anybody, if not more. But on the other hand, there were other problems. It wasn't easy to pick out one or two areas of research that I could describe among his 1,600 papers. And I met Govind Swarup about 5 or 6 times. I had met Srikantan about 5 times. And I had met with his students a few times, spoke to them on the phone, had video calls. It was quite easy because nobody said no. And people willingly gave me time. But I knew that this was not possible with C.N.R. Rao. It's not because he didn't want to, but he was too busy. And it was very difficult for me to convey what I was actually trying to do, because there is no model of a book on science in India. So he had himself written 2 books. And as usual, when I went to meet him, he said, read all my books, which I did and read some of his papers. I had met him before, not many times, but I had met him before. And it's a difficult person to interview because he had a tendency to go at a tangent always, not intentionally, but this is the way he spoke. And it was extremely hard to pick among his 1,600 papers about what was the most important, a few important ones. I asked him, what do you think? What is your most important contribution? So he took me to the next room in GNCSR and told me, this is my most important work, the work that he was doing, which is hydrogen, making hydrogen. So that was a damn squib, but somehow all his students cooperated and spent a lot of time. And from their interviews, a chapter emerged. So it was a very long chapter. Sorry. Then I went to M.M. Sharma. So like Rama Rao, he also had an overabundance of achievement. And there's a lot of variety. I mean, he did chemical engineering, he did research at Judicity, he consulted companies, had a big impact on private companies' work. But it was easy to talk to him. It was easy to spend time, and he spoke well, always to the point. So I met him twice. I met all his students. I met Mashilkar, who was his student, J.B. Joshi, and a few others. And there was enough material on him about his life, about his research. So that chapter got written. And then after M.M. Sharma, the next choice was Mashilkar. Again, he also did a variety of things, but he had a very interesting personal story because he was an exception among all the scientists I had profiled, because most of the people were largely well off, except probably one person. But even that person was not very poor. But Mashilkar had seen real poverty when his father died. And from that situation, he joined UDCT, and it was a very extremely interesting and motivating story. And he saw the potential of business as soon as he joined, and very soon after he joined NCL. And that was the difference. And some of his research, I had known him for a long time, but I never really understood what he did, what about his research. When I looked deeper, I found some very interesting work. And this final point is research on stimuli responsive gels became a very long section in the chapter, and one of the few places where I have described a piece of research at length. And only the book contains only about 3 or 4 instances of such description. So each one of these chapters took me about 4 months of work. After that, I went to Rama Rao, again, inspiring story. His contribution was extraordinary to India's drug industry. Personal story was also powerful. He had failed in his 11th standard, spent 1 year doing nothing, and then suddenly decided he wanted to go back to school. And then he did very well, reached UDCT, NCL. All the stories were quite interesting, and how he built his research, how he worked on ambitious projects. People told him, warned him that these projects were too ambitious and he will not do it, but he kept at it. And in many ways was responsible for giving India's pharmaceutical industry to the courage to crack complicated molecules. So, and then the leather, this was quite a surprise. I had heard about the leather mission, and I had no idea that leather had so much interesting science. Most of that science happened before the leather mission in 1996. But that work of Ramasamy that led up to his being director was actually quite important. And I had started working on this chapter, and parallelly, I started on the next section, which was biology. Biology had started very late compared to chemistry and astronomy. But what they went through was not different one from what M. Sharma or CNR or any of Govind Swarup, anybody else went. They had struggled with money. They struggled with bureaucracy. They struggled with cultural issues. And then I decided to stop the book with NCBS, which in some cases, in some sense, changed the way India worked. Because when NC was being founded, India was going through liberalization. And the country's approach to science itself changed. And there was private sector started investing. And science sort of became more global. And if you wanted to judge Indian science, it had to be from a global point of view. But I was working on all these 3 chapters parallelly when COVID started, and I had to stop. So this was a disappointment. I had done about 80 to 90% of the work for the last 3 chapters. There was something left for the other chapters also. 1 or 2 months into COVID, I realized that this is not going to start. I will not be able to do archival research. I will not be able to meet people. I won't be able to go to the field. So we took a decision to write the book with what I had, even though some portions were a little incomplete, especially the final 3 chapters. So I finished the manuscript sometime in July 2020. Although there were 3 sections in the book, all the chapters had the same theme, like everybody had constraints of resource, bureaucracy was stifling, culture was especially in early period, and this is very stark with CNR Rao. They all gave up their personal ambition to build an India, science in India after independence. So if you look at Govind Swarup, for example, he was doing very good science at Stanford. But when he came to India, he built 2 telescopes that got bogged down with building things, and his science suffered. So in some sense, he had to give up his science to build 2 telescopes. What would he have done if he was in Stanford? Probably he would have been a much better known astronomer for his science. And then all of them used very simple methods. This was a big surprise. Simple methods have their limitations. Money is important, but in spite of poor resources, people were able to do science, at least some people. And a big discovery was the culture that India had, especially after independence. So this is a letter that I found at Indian Institute of Science Archives from Maurice Travers. He was traveling by train, and in the train he wrote a letter to his mother. I found this in that letter. This was in 1909. The government appears to distrust all scientific men and imposes what it supposes to be checks, which are as vexatious as they are useless. The indenting system is an example. Innovations, if they are presented as such, are invariably disallowed or only permitted after a long delay. If, however, you have a button, the government will give you a shirt to fit it. Unfortunately, I could not use this letter because I could not trace the original owner. What IISc had was a copy. And things have not changed much till the 70s. And even now, I'm not sure things have completely changed enough. So finally, what did I learn? I had tried hard to write a book for 15 years. I couldn't do anything. Now, having signed a contract, I had to write one. So it was finished in 2020 after 4 years. In 4 years, I learned these three things. So I was always looking for significance which had a global impact. Now, one of the most interesting things I learned was the significance is not always measured through global impact. Local impact is also equally important. And the second thing is the human motivation for science is very, very strong. Even if you try to stifle them in some way, they will find some way to do science. At least the people who are strongly motivated. You find them everywhere, all over the world, probably. At least you found them in India. And third, isolated stories can be very interesting, even if quite unlike what the editor of that big publication said. I don't have to look for global impact to do a story. But again, there are limitations. You can't stretch it too much. You may be able to write a few stories or a few books, but for science from India to be books to come out of India about Indian science, it has to have significant global impact, or otherwise at some point it will stop. So I will show some pictures here. Pictures were also a casualty because once COVID started, I could not get enough pictures to put it in the book. So these are some random pictures that I've got. I hope one day when a second edition of return, I expand a second edition, I can use some of these pictures and probably get better ones. This is baby Srikantan, I think, in the balloon experiment. This is PC Agarwal at Tumba, testing an X-ray detector. This is a recent photo, probably about 10 or 12 years old, Govind Saroop at the UT telescope. Finally, when I went and saw that UT telescope, it was quite stunning. And descriptions of the 200 tons or 250 tons, half a kilometer long, 30 feet high, they don't give you an idea of how big it is. It's like the Grand Canyon. If you see the Grand Canyon, you realize what it is really. So he became second in the university in the state of 11th in 1960. This is photo. This is A.V. Rama Rao and P.M. Bhargava at some function at IICT. I don't know what function it was. I think this is M.M. Sharma's 60th birthday, when you see Mashekar, CNR, M.M. Sharma. So that's all I have to say. And book is out now. I don't think I have finished it in my mind yet. At some point when things open up, maybe I can expand it or write another book, but what is not done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hari, for a fascinating journey through how Indian science progressed through these troubled times and how people persisted with all their might to make success of what they had. So we can take questions now. Are there any, Satya, do you see questions on the YouTube or on the chat box?
On the Zoom, there is a comment.
There's a question here from Alak Ray.
Okay.
Alak, you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I have two questions, if I am allowed.
Yes, please.
Please.
Number one, you have actually described in your talk, and hopefully it's definitely there in your book, about how chemistry has made contributions to India's growth and economic well-being, etc.
Yes.
But do you have any such discussion in your book about how astronomy and development in India has had? And the second question I have is that towards when he was completing the building of the GMRT towards the end,
Yes.
Govinda got really concerned about um, the India's education sector not being able to have too many people who would come in into science to to really take it forward. And so
Yes.
he had a major role in persuading many people about the need for such educational frameworks. Um, do you write anything about it? And in particular, since you have also been talking about various other, stalwart figures in Indian science, this is also important because, towards the early part of 2000s, we saw newer institutions coming up in a very large way. So
Yeah.
do you discuss any of this?
No.
And or do you have any comments, even though you may not discuss this in your book?
Okay. About the first question, um, I have not discussed the contribution of astronomy to Indian economy, but by implication, it's there how Indian astronomy, how the two telescopes grew a community of astronomers in India, and how the X-ray astronomy programs also grew X-ray astronomy in India. So, but it's the contribution to Indian economy is not discussed. I don't know whether it has a big contribution because it did not lead to many private companies. There was only marginal participation from private. Some companies did participate, but it was not that big. About the second part, the book sort of ends in the mid 1990s because I was looking at only for the first 50 years after independence when things were really bad. From 1990 onwards, after liberalization, things changed. So the story also changed, the narrative changed. So that part of the narrative is not in the book, except as an epilogue, a little bit. So his concerns about education are not there in the book. The last chapter about the book ends with the founding of NCBS.
Okay, so we have Vivek Datta who wants to ask a question. Vivek, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you about. I mean, you have made a choice of talking about scientists and the development of science in three areas mainly post-independence.
Yes.
Do you intend to also look at the situation, or was it a choice made because you could then interview these people and so on? For instance, Jagdish Chandra Bose, Saha, these people made outstanding contributions. Of course, C.V.
Yeah.
Ramanji and so on.
Yeah.
Do you intend to look at that aspect a little later, and also maybe compare what was it that was unique about science in the early days as compared to what we have? Much more money now, but we had many eminent, probably, I don't know, that's a matter of debate, that we had many eminent people in the past as compared to.
Well, the thought did cross my mind. When I first wrote a proposal, they were all there, but again, they were in isolation. So it was supposed to have a chapter on C.V. Raman, one on Saha. I just thought, I wrote whatever came to my mind in half an hour. It was not really a well thought out proposal. But then I changed it to post-independent science because I could build a strong story. Because I could see a beginning in KGF, and then I could see how it developed separately. Astronomy had no connection with chemistry. Chemistry had no real connection with biology. They were all independent developments. But within these sections, I could see a connection and build a story. So it is important, I'm looking for stories. I'm not looking for history. And, I don't know whether you can call it history, But I'm looking for storage in the sense it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Things have to happen. So within astronomy, I
Yes,
could do that.
I wanted to ask this, especially in connection with J.C. Bose. I mean, who did really outstanding work in two completely different areas,
Yeah.
and he was much ahead of his time. And I
Yeah.
don't think there's any good book on him in the manner of, let's say, a book on Ramanujan written by Kanigal. And why can't an Indian write a book on him? He's, after all, our own
So
scientist, and a great one at that. Forget about the fact that he didn't get a Nobel Prize. He was close to it, but somehow he didn't get it for microwave communication. But he certainly did a lot of research on plants, things like that. So, how stimuli affect plants, and he was probably 50 years ahead of his time. So, and I don't know if you have gone to the museum, you will see the kinds of instruments that he built. So,
yeah.
I think something needs to be written on him. He's absolutely,
Yes.
in my view, one of the outstanding figures in Indian science.
Well, Vivek, you gave an idea to Hari for his next book, I'm sure. Okay, Arun Grover, Professor Arun Grover wants to make a comment now. And because I'm coming to you in a short while.
Mr. Hari, do you still have interest in writing stories of 100 years of Indian science? I personally believe it's a very interesting topic. And starting from 1921 to 2021 is just the right space. 1921 is the year that Meghnad Saha returns to Calcutta, and he starts on a journey of Khera professorship offered to him by Ashutosh Mukherjee. 1921 is the year Bhatnagar returns first to Banaras and then moves to Lahore. Okay, 1921 is also the year that Gyanchand J.C. Ghosh, who succeeded Raman as the director and later on became the first director of IIT Kharagpur and then Calcutta University and so on. So this is a very interesting period, and everything that has happened in India after independence is all planned by Meghnad Saha via a symposium convened at Calcutta in September of 1943. And they pass a resolution, get A.V. Hill to come to India, and A.V. Hill writes this reports, scientific research in India, which is actually masterminded by Meghnad Saha, endorsed by A.V. Hill, and all the Indian education that we have that has evolved after independence, and all the scientific research that has evolved in India is all this collection of stories. And if you ever have an interest, I will be delighted to assist you. I just don't have the talent to write it as well, but I am very happy to assist you, no obligation basis, and make everything available to you.
Okay, thank you. In fact, the publisher did ask me if I was interested in writing such a book, but I have not decided. I have another topic in mind, which I think is in my mind it's more important because it's easier to execute. It's a challenging to write, but the material is available. And one of the problems of writing about this Bengali scientist is I think most of the material may be in Bengali. I don't know. I think
no, it's not writing about Bengali scientists, writing about the entire science. The science that has evolved from Calcutta, science which has evolved from BHU, the science which evolved from Allahabad, the science which evolved from Bangalore, the science which evolved from Lahore. Everything is intertwined, including Bhabha. Bhabha was a part of September 1943 symposium convened by J.C. Ghosh, prompted by Meghnad Saha. So everything is there. A.V. Hill is consulted by Bhabha.
Yeah.
So, everything is all integrated.
Yeah.
These are not isolated stories.
Yeah, yeah.
All these people, they know each other, their personal lives are intertwined in that. They support each other, they criticize each other. I mean, so it's a very interesting human stories, all intertwined in a very interesting way.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is being planned, but I don't know when I will do it because of the challenge of it's a long haul project, and I want to do something that I can finish in 2 years first after this. So after that, I'll probably
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, when I tempted you to give a talk here, it's for this reason. TIFR is a place which gives you lots of things to take back. Right? I hope you already got 2 ideas for books now. And
No,
so
we
with
did
that,
discuss this. We did discuss this with the publisher already.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
So over to Vikas Kumar, who has been waiting to ask a question.
Thank you very much, sir, for this presentation. Basically, you have told about like space, mass, and this life. So I think all of the India, it is basically researching like we are doing life, basically like microbiology kind of things, and for like space and these things, astronomies are doing very good work. So like ISERs are there, and these one of that is we have include mass. Mass is doing by material sciences, and many other kind of optics people and electronics people they are doing. So we are getting in the high level competition around the world. So what is the basic you can do, make a complete basic book that will make the India to other level?
Do you understand the question, Hari?
Not fully.
Are
Like
you saying
basically the three aspects you have done.
How to write a book that conveys the whole of the Indian science?
Like we are going to the that particular aspect, that we are going to the universe kind of things, like all of the things we are basically occurring that here.
Yeah.
Well, there are many books that need to be written, but it all depends. I have limited time, and I can probably write one book in 3 years.
Yeah.
It takes at least that much time to write a book. So, well, I hope other people also write books on Indian science.
So
Yes.
Professor Raghunathan, MS Raghunathan has a question. Yeah, please go ahead. Unmute yourself, Professor.
Yeah, that's what I've done. No, you mentioned that it's a pity that no Indian wrote a biography of Ramanujan.
Yeah.
It was Robert Cunningham who wrote that, but there is a Tamil biography, which is good, trifle sentimental if you like, but by a man by name, pen name was Rahami. It's a Tamil biography. In fact, at the time of the Ramanujan centenary, the National Board for Higher Mathematics wanted to commission someone to write a book, biography of Ramanujan.
Okay.
At that time, I contacted this man, Ragami, and I asked for permission to translate his book into English. It didn't work out for some reason. And then we did commission I don't want to mention the name, but we did commission somebody to write. But in my opinion, he produced a book which is simply useless. It was so bad that we decided to cut our losses and refused to publish it. That's the way it's. And the man had a big reputation as a writer of science, but unfortunately, that biography was absolutely useless. So that's one of the things. And even now, there is a case for writing another biography of Ramanujan, because Cunningham book is very good, but obviously, as a foreigner, he really didn't understand the ethos of the Tamil Brahmin family in which Ramanujan was born and grew up and things that kind. So there are some lacunae there, which maybe a new biography can fill in. Anyway, that's and the other point I want to make is that the biographies of very few of the real stalwarts have been written. For example, you mentioned G.N. Ramchandran. I have not seen a biography of GNR. Have you seen one? Who has done it?
No.
There is one book. In fact, that's the project that I was thinking about, writing now.
Oh,
So there is one book
biography at present. And in fact, I have suggested it to the Indian Academy of Sciences that they should publish biographies of some of the well-known scientists. They have published only one really of C.V. Raman. The Academy.
So there is one book which is a biography of G.N. Ramachandran, written by a student Sharma. It went out of print because they went to a very small publisher.
Should publish other.
May I request Hari, just hold on. I think Professor MS sir, can you can you stop your video? Then probably we can hear you better, because the Wi-Fi is not good. No, can you stop your video? I think you muted your mic right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, can you speak, please?
Can you now speak, please?
Mic is still muted.
He is still muted.
Yeah, his mic is still muted.
Now he has opened it. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't have anything more to say. I
Right.
don't know.
all right. Yeah. So,
let me answer that question. There is a biography of J.N. Ramachandran, and it went out of print because they went to a small publisher who didn't do a good job. It was written by Sharma, which one of his students. Now that book is being printed again, and somebody is trying to get type it out all over again. There is no soft copy. It's probably out by the end of the year.
Yeah. So, Satya, do you have any questions on YouTube?
Yeah, one question that I may ask. This is Abhinav Chaudhary from YouTube. The question is, should we focus on preserving our historical and scientific heritage through the creation of institutional archives?
So the process has already begun, I think, in a small way. TIFR has a good archive. NCBS has one. IISc has one. And I think some of the IITs also trying to build. But these are all early days, and it has to go through another 5 to 10 years before they become useful. It's also a culture of preserving things. Archives can't come up out of the blue, right? People have to give them stuff. People have to preserve stuff. If there is a note that you write, and somebody has to preserve it. And I heard about one large institution, I can't name it, which is part of my book, where after sometime in the 2000s, mid 90s, one director burned all the stuff that they had because there was no space. And that would have been an invaluable resource for me to write my book. Because it's not recognized as being important. And in TIFR archives, I found all sorts of interesting stuff, including post-its that people wrote. MGK Menon wrote to somebody about how somebody is joining, and somebody's wife needed to house to stay. All kinds of very personal stories to technical matters. Everything is preserved during that period. But at some point, I think it ended because they have not yet come to the archives. So I wanted to show you something here. I don't know whether I can go back to my...
Yeah, you can share your screen again.
Share your screen.
Because this question...
You can share your screen again.
Okay. It went through quickly.
No, it's not shared yet.
It's not shared. Oh, okay.
You have to share your screen.
Oh.
The button below.
Is that a movie clip or something?
No. It's a letter
okay.
That Govind Swarup wrote in hand to MGK Menon when the Ooty's telescope collapsed. Ultimately, it did not make it to the book, but it gave me insights into his state of mind and a lot of interesting things, which was useful to write the book. I mean, things like this, I don't know how to. I think that facility is gone. Just a second.
No, you can share your screen.
No, you are still a co-host.
Yeah, you have the permission to.
I think I've lost the permission.
No, you are still a co-host.
Okay. So
one second, I'm trying to do it.
So
the same place,
Yeah, it's come. It's come now, right?
Yeah,
not
it was always there.
No, not yet. We don't see your screen yet.
Yeah, it will come in 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. So this is the letter. I have the full letter. It is there in TIFR archives. So it's extremely interesting that he wrote, when you read this letter, it's about several pages. This is only the first page. And this is the sort of stuff that need to be preserved. TIFR has preserved it. I don't think many other institutions have done this sort of thing.
Okay, this was when a storm happened or something happened and the Uti telescope suffered damage. Was it that
No,
time?
no. It was not yet. It had just begun operation. And I think a coupling came off and one part of the came off and one part collapsed.
I see.
And it's the interesting thing is that they knew that this is going to happen, and they were supposed to have put some other support. But whoever was supposed to do it postponed it by a week, and it collapsed.
Oh. Okay. So Alak has raised.
You have included this in the book nicely.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I read about that too. Now, Alak, you have one more comment question, or was it earlier?
No. If I may ask again.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the new attempts of various institutions to create their archives. Yeah, and that's apart from TIFR, there are a few other archives which are coming up. But on the other hand, can you think of archives, not of documents, but of instrumentation and other material like that? There isn't any such thing that I know of, or even a centralized facility for India to preserve its old heritage of instrumentation and things like that. Do you have any idea as to if there's any thought about this?
No, I have no idea, but the National Archives is trying to do something, but as far as I know, nothing about instrumentation.
Okay.
One question in the Zoom, if you can see, okay. It says, has anyone written about our work in Antarctica? I have
India's work in Antarctica.
India's work, yeah.
Hari,
not as a book, as far as I know, but I have seen articles in magazines.
Okay.
There was a comment from Munni about the book on J.C. Bose, I think, which Professor Datar was.
Patrick Geddes. By Patrick Geddes?
Yes. Yeah. I think Dilip D'Souza want to ask. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, Hari, that was me who asked the question about Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
No, and I said I have a sort of personal reason for asking because I've done a longish article on Antarctica that on our work that it should be out in a couple of weeks, I believe 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
And I was just, at the back of my head, mainly because I want to go to Antarctica, I was thinking of turning that into a book proposal. So that's why I was just trying to find out if anybody had already written about Antarctica.
Not to my knowledge, and I'm sure publishers will be very interested.
Okay. Anyone willing to fund a trip for me to Antarctica?
that I'm not sure.
Gosh. Not in these times, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, Hari, thanks for that. And as you know, I'm writing something for you, so I will get back to you about that. Yeah. Okay.
So Satya, I don't see any more. So maybe I will ask one if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So Hari, having been through all this journey, talking to people, you have sampled, much more than any one of us could have actually seen things, the way they evolve. So do you have any, what do you think should change from the past for us to be, as you said, globally competitive more and more? Would you have some insights into that?
I think scientists would know this much more than I do.
Yeah, but maybe scientists can't say it. Journalists can.
Bureaucracy. and as I said, it's still very, very bad.
Okay.
And also, I think, this is a personal observation. I think science is going away too fast from the public. And I don't think people have any idea of where science is and what it can do. And most people, if they don't know enough science, you can't think, you can't know, you don't know how to do, think about problems, everyday problems, not about, what scientists think about. So once they finish their education, they don't read about science. And I don't think this is a new thing, but because science is advancing so fast, the distance is getting bigger and bigger very, very quickly. And I think in the long run, it has dangers. But people don't understand basic things, to take policy decisions. People think, vaccines will cause autism into climate change. Every important issue you need to fight. And so ultimately, politicians are a representative of the people. If the majority of people think and understand science, then it may be much easier to make good policy.
Okay.
So I don't think a school or even college education really teaches you science. I don't know now, but I think very, very well that I said I have studied zoology. For my undergraduate degree, zoology, botany, and chemistry. So I went through 12 plus 3, 15 years of science classes, and I did not enjoy even one science class. And I did not enjoy reading even one textbook on science.
Yeah.
Okay, there is a question.
There's a question from Ajay Sood. I think.
Sorry, it's not a question, but a comment prompted by Ravi. Hari, I somehow find that even whatever appears in the media these days on science is a very, application kind of a thing, as if that is end all of every science. I see almost close to zero something about science for the excitement or so on. The surprising thing is, as you said, astronomy appeals to a lot of people, though it is hard to find that it will give you next application tomorrow and so on. But it interests people. But somehow when it comes to media writing, I don't know why there is a perception that only the things which have some application will interest public. Do you have any sense, or is it a wrong notion? Somehow I find it very disturbing. Not disturbing, I find it very odd.
Indeed.
So I think what appears in the media, there are only a handful of papers. Even after big expansion, what appears is driven by the editors and their perception of what people want to read. And it is very common in the newsrooms to feel that what they want to read is what people want to read. And what they find interesting is what people would find interesting. So this excludes a large amount of very interesting and significant things. So this is a sort of new development, because of this clicks. When we started journalism, this is not a question that many newsrooms asked. How many people would people want to read this? That was the wrong question. We would ask, is this, do they ought to read this? So is it significant? And not that this is interesting. And if it's significant, it's your job to make it interesting.
Yeah.
So Dilip, who just wrote, asked that question, he writes, about mathematics in a very interesting way. He just put a note there. So somehow media journalism has moved away from what is significant to what is interesting. What I think is interesting is not necessarily what is interesting.
Yeah, right. So it's a perception which has changed in many last few years. And somehow I think it's not a very healthy trend. That's all.
Yeah.
But that is not the case in the US. If I can give another example, you must have seen this lectures by Susskind.
Yeah, Susskind.
Stanford. It is open. It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of education, adult education that he wanted to give. General lectures, anybody could attend. And I was watching those lectures, and one day he asked a question. So, how many people here are over 60? A large number of people raised their hand. And how many are over 70? Again, a significant number raised their hands. And then 80. There were still people who were over 80 and then taking physics classes. So this may not be possible in India. You know, the World Science Festival in New York that Brian Greene runs, is sold out. 3,000 people in the auditorium. Wow. If you run a festival in India, would we find that many people? I don't think, right?
Yeah.
Who will pay good money to attend a science talk?
Yeah.
Sufficient, you know, lots of things to think about. Well, Hari, before we conclude, I just want to say Professor Prahlad Agarwal is there. Is still, I see him there. And he was, I think he's still there. Or Professor Agarwal, would you have any question, comment? Yeah. Would you have any comment, Professor Agarwal?
I think his mic is unmuted.
Yeah, you're muted. You have to unmute.
Yeah.
Well, I think he is presented in a nutshell. The book continued the book very well. The book is very well written. I think it is objectively done because I can see that he has given credit to the people who have contributed to the particular field and he has named them individually. Of course, in a talk like this, he cannot, you know, name everybody and bring out the contribution, but I think it's done very well. So I think it's one of the better written books about the Indian science.
Okay. So, well, thank you, Professor Agarwal. The reason I asked you is that, you know, I happen to have read the Kindle version. The paper one has just come out, but I had an alert from Hari and I read the Kindle version. So many of the people, including people on the screen, came alive to me. I hadn't known. In fact, it was sort of education for me to know about what TIFR did. You know, I must confess that it doesn't sound very nice that after all these years, I still don't know. But people came alive and the struggles and everything, including your own. I learned a lot of things about you, Professor Agarwal, about including what, you know, all your entire journey through schooling and other, you know, your progress towards that AstroSat. And I think several people here mention, they find a mention in the book. I think they have read, but we should read about what has been written about them so that we discover them for ourselves. So it's a fascinating read. I believe N.R. Narayan Murthy said it's unputdownable. And I quite agree with that sentiment. So please, I think, well, I shouldn't be championing the book. Hari has done enough for that. But I would say that it's a great read because it tells us about what people have done. You know, we must pay our respects to what people have achieved under much more adverse conditions than we have right now. As I said, we have liberalized post-90 and we still crib about lots of things. Of course, they should change. But what they went through and the boldness and the courage that they showed in those times is truly remarkable. So thank you, Hari, and you can take back all these sentiments and the proposals for books. And thanks for giving us this wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And, you know, waking us up to what we ought to be knowing about Indian science, right? And thanks everyone for joining this colloquium.
Yeah,
thank you.
From my side too, thanks, Hari. And of course, most importantly, thanks, JRK. This is a great proposal, and you also, I mean, the way the value it brought to, and as you said, it has actually made all people come alive on the platform. So it's fantastic. Thank you very much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well,